stray dog burst through the crowded farmer's market, sending vendors scrambling and children crying. But when he dragged something out from beneath an old blanket, what they found left the entire crowd frozen in shocked silence. Here's what happened. But before we get into today's story, drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. And if you love extraordinary animal stories like this one, check out our other channel, where the heroes are cats instead of dogs. Make sure you're subscribed over there too. The link's in the pinned comment. The Saturday morning sun painted downtown Crestwood in golden light that made even cynical residents remember why they'd chosen small-town life. By 10 o'clock, the farmer's market was hitting its stride, families with strollers navigating between elderly couples examining heirloom tomatoes, while teenagers clutched iced coffees and wandered past booths overflowing with sunflowers and mason jars of honey. Sergeant Linda Hale had deliberately left her badge at home. Saturday mornings were sacred, her one guaranteed day off, spent browsing the market with her 8-year-old niece Ava, who was currently demolishing a paper cone of kettle corn. Linda's long hair hung loose instead of pulled back in regulation fashion, and she wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt that made her look more like a teacher than a 15-year veteran of the force. "Aunt Linda, can we get the strawberry jam?" Ava asked, pointing toward a booth where an elderly woman was arranging preserves. "Of course, sweetheart," Linda replied. They'd just finished browsing through the used book cart when the first shouts erupted. The crowd near the central plaza suddenly rippled like water, disturbed by a stone. Heads turned, voices rose in surprise and alarm, and then, cutting through the narrow aisle between the citrus crates and Martha's pottery booth, a dog burst into view. Linda's first instinct was that someone's pet had slipped its leash. It happened occasionally at the market, but as the animal got closer, that assumption crumbled. This wasn't a well-fed family pet. The dog was lean to the point of ribs showing through matted, dirt-streaked fur. One hind leg carried a slight limp, and its coat bore the unmistakable signs of street life. But what struck Linda wasn't the dog's obvious neglect. It was the look in its eyes. This wasn't an animal running wild in panic. There was purpose in its movements, intelligence in the way it scanned the crowd as it ran. Vendors shouted in alarm as the stray barreled through their carefully arranged displays. A crate of oranges crashed to the asphalt, sending fruit rolling between people's feet. A little boy dropped his apple juice box and burst into tears as the dog tore past close enough to ruffle his hair. Linda instinctively pulled Ava behind her, one hand on her niece's shoulder while the other moved toward her hip, a reflexive gesture that found only empty space where her service weapon would normally rest. The dog didn't stop at the first row of booths. It wove through the crowd with startling agility despite its limp dodging lawn chairs and picnic blankets with precision. It wasn't biting, wasn't growling. It was simply heading somewhere with determination. Near the edge of the picnic area, the dog suddenly skidded to a halt. It had reached an old wool blanket that appeared unoccupied, just another spot where visitors had briefly rested. A hush fell over the closest dozen spectators. Some had their phones out, already recording what they assumed would be an amusing story to share later. Others simply stared, unsure whether to intervene or stay back. The morning's cheerful market atmosphere had shifted into something uncertain, expectant. Linda took a step forward, her years of police work kicking in despite the civilian clothes. She'd learned to trust her instincts about when situations crossed into something serious. And watching this stray dog paw frantically at something tucked under the corner of that blanket, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest that meant trouble. The dog wasn't digging randomly. Its movements were too focused, too deliberate. It was trying to unearth something specific, something wrapped in dark fabric that had been carefully concealed beneath the seemingly innocent picnic blanket. With a final determined yank, the dog managed to drag the object free with its teeth, pulling it into the morning sunlight before taking several steps back. Then it did something that made Linda's blood run cold. It sat, not casual pet sitting, but the rigid, alert posture of an animal that had completed a mission and was waiting for someone to understand what it had delivered. "What is that?" Ava whispered, her voice barely audible over the sudden quiet that had fallen over their section of the market. Linda didn't answer immediately. Her trained eye was already cataloging details. The careful way the object had been wrapped, the deliberate placement beneath what appeared to be an abandoned blanket, the dog's behavior that suggested this wasn't random but purposeful retrieval. She handed Ava's popcorn to the confused vendor beside them and stepped forward through the ring of onlookers. Her hand found her phone as she approached, thumb hovering over dispatch. Not yet. She needed to see what they were dealing with first, but every instinct told her that whatever that stray dog had just dragged into the light was about to change this peaceful Saturday morning. Linda's boots clicked against the warm asphalt as she moved through the crowd with the economical grace of someone accustomed to taking charge. Even in civilian clothes, there was something in her bearing that made people step aside automatically. She reached the edge of the picnic area where the commotion had frozen the nearby shoppers into a semicircle of wide eyes and hesitantly raised cell phones. The morning's cheerful market soundtrack had given way to almost reverent quiet. The stray crouched protectively over a denim jacket it had dragged from beneath the checkered blanket. Linda could see immediately that something was bundled inside the jacket, creating weight and shape that suggested deliberate packaging. The dog's breathing was rapid but controlled, its dark eyes never leaving hers. And there was something almost human in its expression, urgency mixed with relief. "Easy there," Linda said softly, her voice carrying the calm authority she'd developed from years of de-escalating tense situations. She raised one hand in a peaceful gesture while addressing the growing crowd without taking her eyes off the animal. "Everyone just stay back for a minute. Don't startle him." The dog's ears twitched at her voice, but it didn't retreat or show any signs of aggression. Instead, it shifted slightly, using its muzzle to nudge the bundled jacket forward a few inches, then settled back into that same watchful sitting position. The gesture was so deliberate, so clearly communicative, that Linda felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm morning air. She knelt slowly on the grass beside the blanket, ignoring the dampness seeping through her jeans. This close, she could see that the denim jacket was adult-sized but wrapped around something much smaller. Whatever lay inside felt significant, not just in weight, but in the careful way it had been concealed. With practiced care, Linda began to unfold the denim layers. Her hands moved with the methodical precision of someone who had processed countless crime scenes, even though that part of her mind insisted this was probably nothing more than lost property. The fabric fell away to reveal 3 items that made Linda's breath catch in her throat and her professional composure falter for just a moment. A child's phone case, bright pink with cartoon characters but cracked along one corner, as if it had been dropped or thrown. A small sandal, white canvas with a broken buckle, sized for a child around 8 or 9 years old. And a plastic hairbrush, its bright purple handle scraped and dirty, with several long strands of blonde hair tangled hopelessly in the bristles. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the heavy, oppressive kind that settles when everyone realizes they're witnessing something terrible. A woman gasped. A man cursed under his breath. Even the musicians seemed to sense the change, their melody trailing off. The stray dog observed her examination with what could only be described as satisfaction. It had delivered its message and was now waiting with infinite patience. But then it did something that would haunt Linda's dreams. It lay down next to the items, not possessively, but beside them, like a sentinel keeping vigil over evidence. "Whose stuff is this?" Linda called out, her voice carrying over the crowd with the unmistakable authority of law enforcement. She held up the small sandal, its cheerful white canvas now seeming heartbreakingly small in her adult hands. "Does anyone recognize these things? Who is sitting here?" The crowd exchanged uncertain glances, but for several long moments no one spoke. Linda felt her chest tighten with the familiar weight of a case that was about to become very complicated very quickly. Finally, a vendor stepped forward, a woman in her early 50s, wearing an apron decorated with strawberries. "There was a couple here earlier," she said breathlessly. "Young folks, maybe college age. They had a blanket spread out right there. Seemed to be having coffee and pastries from the bakery booth. When was this? Do you remember what time? Oh, maybe half an hour ago. They seemed tense, like maybe they'd been arguing. When the bluegrass band started up again, they packed up really quick and left toward the parking area. Did you see them with a child? Linda pressed, though something cold was already settling in her stomach. The vendor shook her head slowly. No, just the two of them, but... She paused, her expression growing troubled. Now that I think about it, the girl, she kept looking around like she was nervous about something. And the guy, he had this duffel bag that he kept real close, wouldn't even set it down to eat. Linda turned back to survey the crowd, her mind automatically cataloging faces and reactions. Did anyone else see this couple? Anyone get a good look at them? Or remember anything else? An elderly man stepped forward, his granddaughter clinging to his side, with the wide-eyed fascination children show when adult conversations become serious. Ma'am, he said carefully, I might not know about the couple, but that sandal... My granddaughter here goes to school with a girl who has shoes just like that. Mia something. Sweet little girl, blonde hair and pigtails most days. The granddaughter tugged on his sleeve insistently. Mia Barnes, Grandpa, she whispered loudly. She's in my class at Willow Lane Elementary. She always wears those white shoes with the buckles. Linda felt her pulse quicken. Are you certain about that? The old man nodded slowly. Pretty sure. Sarah here plays with her at recess sometimes. Those shoes stood out because most kids wear sneakers, but Mia always had these little canvas ones with the silver buckles. Without hesitation, Linda pulled out her phone and dialed the direct line to dispatch. The familiar voice of dispatch operator Martinez answered on the second ring, and Linda could hear the controlled chaos of a Saturday morning shift in the background. Radio chatter, ringing phones, the constant low-level urgency that defined police communication centers. This is Sergeant Hale, badge number 2847, calling off duty, she said, her voice automatically shifting into the clipped, professional tone that conveyed urgency without panic. I need you to run a check on any active missing child reports, particularly anything filed within the last 12 to 24 hours. I'm at the downtown farmers market with possible evidence of a missing child situation. She gave her precise location, then described each item in careful detail while the dog continued its patient vigil beside the evidence. Around them, the crowd had grown as word spread through the market that something serious was happening. Parents were pulling their own children closer. Vendors were abandoning their booths to see what the commotion was about. And the usual cheerful chaos of the Saturday market was giving way to the tense energy of a community suddenly aware that their safe small-town bubble might have been pierced. Martinez's voice came back over the line within 2 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. Sergeant, we do have an active report. Missing child named Mia Barnes, age 9, blonde hair, brown eyes, approximately 4'2" tall. Report was filed by her mother, Jennifer Barnes, at 2130 hours yesterday evening. Child was last seen leaving a friend's house on Claremont Drive around 1900 hours. Mother expected her home by 8 p.m. When she didn't arrive, neighbors helped search the immediate area before the family contacted us. Linda's hand tightened on the phone as she looked down at the items again, seeing them now not as lost property, but as evidence in what was rapidly becoming her case, whether she was on duty or not. Blonde hair? Affirmative. Mother described it as long, usually worn in ponytails or braids. Child was wearing a white canvas shoes with buckle straps, pink jacket, and carrying a purple backpack with school supplies. The description matched too perfectly to be coincidence. Linda's mind was already racing ahead, calculating timelines and possibilities, but she was interrupted by the dog's behavior changing yet again. The stray stood up suddenly, its body tensing with renewed alertness, and let out 2 sharp barks, not the random barking of an excited animal, but the deliberate communicative sounds of something trying to convey specific information. The dog turned toward the alley that ran behind the market booths and stared with laser focus, its tail rigid and ears forward in the classic pose of an animal that had detected something significant. It looked back at Linda once, as if to make sure she was paying attention, then fixed its gaze on the narrow passage between buildings where vendors occasionally brought their vehicles for loading and unloading. "Dispatch, I'm going to need backup units at my location," Linda said into her phone, never taking her eyes off the dog. "I've got a possible match on the missing child case and—" She paused, knowing how this was going to sound, but trusting her instincts anyway. "And I think we might have a witness who's trying to tell us something." The voice on the other end was professionally neutral. "Copy that, Sergeant. Units are en route. ETA approximately 3 minutes." Linda looked down at the stray, who was now whining softly, a sound full of urgency and purpose. Every fiber in her body was telling her that this animal hadn't just stumbled across these items randomly. Somehow, impossible as it seemed, this dog knew something about what had happened to Mia Barnes. "Someone get me a leash," she announced to the crowd, her decision made. "And clear a path. He's not finished showing us what he knows." The dog's ears perked up at her words, and for a moment, Linda could have sworn she saw something almost like relief in its dark eyes. It had found someone who understood that it was trying to help, someone willing to listen to what it was desperately trying to communicate. As if released by her words, the stray took off toward the alley at a purposeful trot. Not the wild running of before, but the controlled movement of an animal with a specific destination in mind. Linda didn't hesitate. Leaving Ava in the care of Mrs. Henderson from the book booth, she followed, her instincts and 15 years of experience telling her that whatever this dog was leading her to, she needed to see it. The narrow alley behind the market booths felt like stepping into a different world entirely. Where the main market area buzzed with life and color and the cheerful chaos of commerce, this service corridor was all shadows and concrete, designed for function rather than beauty. Gravel crunched under Linda's feet as she picked her way between stacked crates and industrial dumpsters, following the dog's confident path toward the rear parking area, where late-arriving vendors sometimes set up their overflow vehicles. The stray moved with purpose now, its earlier urgency replaced by the focused determination of an animal following a scent trail only it could detect. Its nose stayed close to the ground, occasionally lifting to test the air currents, and Linda found herself studying its body language with the intensity she usually reserved for reading human suspects. This wasn't random searching. The dog knew where it was going. They emerged from the alley into a cracked asphalt lot bordered by a chain-link fence that separated the market area from the industrial district beyond. Most of the parking spaces were empty at this hour, with only a few vehicles belonging to vendors who had arrived late or were preparing for afternoon setup. But the dog's attention fixed immediately on a delivery truck parked at an odd angle near the fence, an older model with faded red paint and rust eating away at the wheel wells. Linda's law enforcement instincts kicked into high gear as she studied the vehicle. Everything about it looked wrong for a legitimate vendor operation. No company logo, no license plate that she could see from this angle. Windows that appeared to be covered with cardboard or tape from the inside. The truck looked abandoned, but the dog's behavior suggested otherwise. The stray circled the vehicle once, its movements becoming increasingly agitated before focusing on the rear doors. It pawed frantically at the base of the cargo area, whining with an urgency that made Linda's skin crawl. Then looked back at her, with an expression so clearly communicative that she felt goosebumps rise on her arms despite the warm morning air. She pulled out her phone again, this time calling dispatch directly. "This is Sergeant Hale again. I need backup units at the east parking lot behind the farmer's market immediately. I've got what appears to be an abandoned vehicle that my witness is showing significant interest in, requesting units with bolt cutters and possible evidence recovery team." "Copy that, Sergeant. Units en route. ETA 90 seconds. But 90 seconds felt like an eternity as Linda circled the truck, noting details that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The rear doors were secured with a heavy padlock that showed recent use despite the vehicle's generally decrepit appearance. There were scuff marks in the dirt around the back bumper, suggesting the doors had been opened recently, and there was a smell, faint but unmistakable to someone who had processed enough crime scenes. Not decomposition, thankfully, but the chemical odors of duct tape, cleaning supplies, and fear sweat that often lingered in spaces where violence had occurred. The dog had stopped its frantic pawing and was now sitting beside the truck in that same watchful position, but its body remained tense, and its eyes never left the locked cargo area. When Linda moved to examine the driver's side window, she discovered that what she'd assumed was cardboard covering was actually black duct tape applied from the inside, a classic technique for preventing anyone from seeing into or out of a vehicle. The sound of sirens approaching brought her back to the immediate moment. 2 patrol cars pulled into the lot with their lights flashing, but sirens now silent, followed closely by a white police SUV that Linda recognized as belonging to the evidence recovery team. Officer Martinez climbed out of the first patrol car, his hand resting casually on his utility belt as he approached. "What do we have, Sergeant?" Martinez asked, his young face serious despite his informal tone. He'd worked enough cases with Linda to know that when she called for backup, it wasn't for trivial reasons. "Possible connection to the missing child case," Linda replied, gesturing toward the truck while keeping one eye on the dog, who remained focused on the rear doors. "This animal led me here from the market where we found what appears to be the missing girl's personal belongings. I need those doors opened." Officer Chen emerged from the evidence vehicle carrying a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters, while Martinez began photographing the scene from multiple angles. The dog watched the proceedings with what Linda could only describe as approval, as if it understood that the proper authorities were finally taking action on the information it had been trying to provide. "Stand clear," Chen announced, as she positioned the cutters on the padlock. The metal gave way with a sharp crack that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet parking lot. Linda positioned herself to one side of the door opening, her hand instinctively moving toward where her service weapon would normally rest. Even though she was off duty and unarmed, years of training kicked in as Martinez grabbed the door handle. "On 3, he said quietly. 1, 2, 3. The door swung open with a protesting groan of ancient hinges, and the chemical smell that had been faint outside hit them like a wave. Linda's stomach clenched as she peered into the cargo area, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The space had clearly been used as a makeshift holding area. Scattered in the corners were items that painted a terrifying picture: lengths of rope, partially unrolled duct tape still sticky with use, and what appeared to be a child's clothing. A pink jacket crumpled against one wall, and a small purple backpack that matched the description Dispatch had given her of Mia Barnes' belongings. "This is definitely a crime scene," Linda said quietly, her professional training taking over despite the civilian clothes and the off-duty status. "We need to process this immediately and expand the search perimeter." But even as she spoke, the dog was moving again, its attention shifting away from the truck toward the fence line that bordered the industrial area beyond the parking lot. Its body language had changed once more, taking on the focused intensity that Linda was beginning to recognize as the animal's signal that there was more to be discovered. "He's not done," she said, watching, as the stray moved toward a gap in the chain-link fence that was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "Whatever happened to Mia Barnes? I don't think it ended here." Martinez was already calling for additional units and a forensics team, while Chen began the careful process of documenting the truck's contents without disturbing potential evidence. But Linda found herself drawn toward the fence, following the dog that had somehow appointed itself as the lead investigator in a case that was growing more serious by the minute. The gap in the fence led to a patch of undeveloped industrial land that looked like it had been forgotten by time and city planning. Weeds grew through cracks in old concrete foundations, and a set of abandoned railroad tracks cut a rusty line through the landscape toward a row of warehouses that had seen better decades. It was the kind of place where someone could disappear entirely, where screams wouldn't carry to any inhabited buildings, where a scared 9-year-old girl could be hidden away from anyone who might think to look for her. The dog slipped through the fence opening with practiced ease, as if it had used this route before, and immediately picked up what appeared to be a scent trail leading toward the warehouses. Its pace quickened, and Linda could see the tension building in its muscles as they moved deeper into the industrial wasteland. Behind them, she could hear more sirens approaching and the controlled chaos of a major crime scene beginning to unfold. But ahead of them lay answers, and possibly a little girl who had been missing for almost 18 hours, and whose fate might depend on following a homeless dog's urgent mission through the forgotten corners of their quiet town. Linda squeezed through the fence opening, feeling the rough chain link catch at her flannel shirt, and found herself in what felt like an entirely different world from the cheerful farmer's market just a few hundred yards away. The industrial landscape stretched before them like a post-apocalyptic movie set. Cracked concrete slabs overgrown with weeds, rusted machinery slowly being reclaimed by nature, and the skeletal remains of buildings that had once housed the manufacturing heart of Crestwood before the economic shifts of the 1990s had moved those jobs elsewhere. The dog moved with increasing confidence across this desolate terrain, following what appeared to be a well-worn path between concrete barriers and collapsed fencing. Linda realized that this wasn't the first time the animal had navigated this route. It moved with the familiarity of something that had made this journey before, possibly multiple times in recent days. The abandoned railroad tracks ran like a scar through the landscape, their steel rails now orange with rust and the wooden ties slowly rotting into the earth between them. The dog didn't hesitate as it bounded across the tracks and down the embankment on the other side, heading directly toward a cluster of warehouses that loomed against the morning sky like tombstones, marking the death of Crestwood's industrial age. As they approached the first building, Linda could see that while most of the structures appeared genuinely abandoned, windows broken, doors hanging off their hinges, walls covered in graffiti, one building looked different. Warehouse 4, according to the faded stencil numbers, still visible above what had once been a loading dock, appeared more intact than its neighbors. Its windows were covered with plywood rather than simply broken, and the ground around it showed signs of recent foot traffic that had worn paths through the weeds. The dog's behavior changed dramatically as they neared the building. The confident trotting gave way to careful, stalking movements, and Linda could see its muscles coiling with tension beneath the matted fur. It approached a metal door at the side of the building, a door that looked solid and secure despite the decrepit appearance of everything around it. Then, the dog did something that made Linda's blood run cold. It began pawing at the base of the door just as it had done at the truck, but this time it was accompanied by a low, urgent whining that seemed to carry a note of recognition. This wasn't the searching behavior of an animal following a scent trail. This was the behavior of an animal that had found what it was looking for. Linda pulled out her phone to call for backup, but before she could dial, she heard something that made her freeze. A sound so faint, she almost missed it, so muffled it could have been wind, or settling metal, or her imagination. But it sounded like a voice, a young voice, weak and scared. "Hello? Is someone there?" The dog's whining intensified, and it began scratching more frantically at the door, looking back at Linda with eyes that seemed to plead for action. There was no doubt now. Somewhere inside that seemingly abandoned warehouse was a child, and based on the timeline and the evidence they'd already recovered, Linda was almost certain it was Mia Barnes. She forced herself to stay calm as she dialed dispatch, her police training overriding the rush of adrenaline that wanted her to kick down the door immediately. "This is Sergeant Hale, and I need an emergency response team at Warehouse 4 in the old industrial district east of the farmer's market. I have possible contact with our missing child. I need backup, paramedics, and a tactical unit immediately." "Copy that, Sergeant. All units are en route to your location. ETA 4 minutes. 4 minutes that could feel like 4 hours when a child's life was at stake. Linda approached the door carefully, noting that, unlike the decrepit building around it, this entrance showed signs of recent maintenance. The lock was new, and there were fresh scratches around the keyhole that suggested frequent use. "Mia?" she called out, keeping her voice calm and reassuring. My name is Sergeant Hale with the police. Are you in there, honey? The response was immediate and heartbreaking. Yes, I'm here. Please help me. The dog sat down beside the door and looked up at Linda with an expression that seemed to say, I told you so. Then it tilted its head back and let out a long, mournful howl that seemed to echo across the abandoned landscape, the sound of an animal that had completed an impossible mission and was calling for help to arrive. In the distance, Linda could hear sirens approaching, growing louder by the second. But even as relief flooded through her at the knowledge that backup was coming, she couldn't take her eyes off the stray dog that had somehow managed to lead her across half the town to find a missing child. However it had happened, whatever instinct or intelligence or simple dumb luck had guided this animal, it had just accomplished something that would have taken the entire police department hours or possibly days to achieve through conventional investigation. We found you, Mia, Linda called through the door, her voice steady despite the emotions churning in her chest. You're going to be okay. We're going to get you out of there right now. And beside her, the nameless stray dog sat patiently in the morning sun, its job finally done. The tactical team's arrival transformed the desolate industrial landscape into a carefully controlled operation zone within minutes. Officers took positions around the warehouse while a locksmith worked on the door, and paramedics stood ready with equipment that Linda hoped wouldn't be necessary but knew might be vital. Through it all, the dog remained positioned beside the warehouse door like a sentinel, never moving more than a few feet from the building that contained the child it had led them to. When the lock finally gave way and the door swung open, Linda was the first person inside, her eyes adjusting quickly to the dim interior. The warehouse was mostly empty except for some scattered debris and old equipment. But in the far corner, huddled against the concrete wall, was a small figure that made Linda's heart clench with a mixture of relief and fury. Mia Barnes was alive, conscious, and alert. Though her clothes were dirty and her hair was tangled with bits of debris, her ankles were bound with duct tape, and she looked dehydrated and exhausted, but Linda could see no obvious signs of serious physical injury. The girl's eyes went wide when she saw the adults entering, then filled with tears of relief. But what happened next was something Linda would remember for the rest of her career. As soon as the dog appeared in the doorway, Mia's expression changed completely. The fear and uncertainty melted away, replaced by pure joy. Shadow! She cried out, using a name that made Linda realize this wasn't the first time the child and the stray had encountered each other. You found them! I knew you would! The dog approached slowly, its earlier urgency replaced by gentle care as it settled down beside Mia, allowing her to wrap her arms around its neck. Through her tears, the story began to emerge. How she'd been grabbed while walking home from her friend's house the evening before, how her captor had brought her to this warehouse and left her here while he went to figure out what to do next, and how the dog had appeared at a small window high in the wall earlier that morning. I dropped my shoe out the window hoping someone would see it, Mia whispered against the dog's fur. And he saw it. He stayed right there, looking at me, and then he left. I thought he was gone. But I hoped he was going to get help. As paramedics checked Mia's condition and officers processed the warehouse scene, Linda found herself studying the stray with new respect. Somehow, this animal had not only discovered a kidnapped child, but had managed to piece together a complex plan to lead authorities to her location. It had retrieved evidence from the farmer's market, evidence that her captor had apparently tried to dispose of there, carried it to where it would be found by people who could understand its significance, and then led them back to the source. The investigation that followed revealed that Mia's kidnapper was a drifter named Robert Hayes, who had been living rough in the various abandoned buildings around the industrial district. He'd apparently developed an obsession with the idea of rescuing a child to create the family he'd never had, and had been watching children at the elementary school and around town for weeks before finally acting on his delusions. Hayes was arrested 12 hours later when he returned to the warehouse, apparently intending to move Mia to a different location. He confessed quickly when confronted with the evidence, including security camera footage that showed him disposing of Mia's belongings at the farmer's market early that morning, never imagining that a homeless dog had been watching from nearby and would soon turn his attempted cover-up into the very trail that led to his capture. But the day belonged to the stray dog that had somehow managed to accomplish what would have been considered impossible if anyone had suggested it as a plan. By evening, as Mia was reunited with her frantic parents at the hospital, the dog, now officially named Shadow at Mia's insistence, had become something of a local legend. Linda stood in the hospital corridor, watching through the room's window as Mia's parents took turns thanking Shadow while he sat patiently beside her bed. The transformation in both the child and the animal was remarkable. Shadow's earlier urgency had given way to calm contentment, as if he understood that his mission was complete, and Mia, despite her ordeal, seemed more concerned with making sure Shadow had enough water and the hamburger her father had brought from the cafeteria than with her own condition. "So what happens to him now?" asked Officer Martinez, who had joined Linda in the hallway after finishing his preliminary report. Linda watched as Mia's mother knelt beside the dog, gently examining his matted fur and the old scars that spoke of a hard life on the streets. "I think," she said softly, "that he just found himself a family." And indeed, by the time the hospital was ready to discharge Mia the following morning, the paperwork for Shadow's adoption had already been completed. The Barnes family had insisted that the dog who saved their daughter deserved a home. And Shadow seemed more than willing to accept the position of family protector and Mia's constant companion. Linda attended the small ceremony the following weekend when the mayor presented Shadow with an honorary citation for assistance to law enforcement, but she thought the real ceremony had already taken place in that warehouse, when a scared little girl and a homeless dog had found each other and discovered that sometimes the most important rescues happen when those who need help learn to help each other. Years later, Linda would tell this story to new recruits as an example of keeping an open mind about sources of information and trusting instincts, even when they defied logical explanation. But privately, she would always believe that what happened that Saturday morning was something more than just animal instinct or coincidence. In a world that often seemed to lack compassion, a dog with no name and no home had seen a child in need and moved heaven and earth to save her, and in the process, both the dog and the child had found exactly what they needed most. Someone who would never abandon them, no matter what. Have you ever witnessed an animal display the kind of intelligence and determination that Shadow showed that day? What would you have thought if you'd seen a stray dog dragging a child's belongings into a crowded market? Sometimes the most extraordinary rescues come from the most unexpected heroes. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one and love hearing your own stories of animal heroism. If this incredible story of courage and determination moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another amazing rescue story. Your support helps us continue sharing these remarkable tales of unlikely heroes who prove that compassion and bravery know no boundaries. Like this video, if you believe that animals can sense things we humans often miss, and share it with anyone who needs to be reminded that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, sometimes with 4 legs, and a determination that won't quit. Check out our previous stories appearing on your screen now. And remember, sometimes the most ordinary days can become extraordinary when we're willing to listen to those who can't speak but have everything important to say. We'll see you tomorrow with another incredible story of courage, determination, and the unbreakable bonds that connect all living beings who choose to care for each other.